Part 1. The Calm Before the Storm. A gentle breeze whispered through the snow-covered treetops, draping the pine forest in what looked like a soft layer of sugar frosting. The sky was a crystal-clear blue, still and calm like a mirror-like lake, dotted with only a few drifting white clouds. Amid this picturesque scenery, the Harrison family was enjoying their special winter break. A camping trip in the forest near Lake Michigan, about a 2-hour drive from Chicago. They had set up camp beside a small stream where the water babbled gently and reflected the soft golden light of the morning sun. Next to the tent, a small fire crackled, releasing the scent of pine resin and comforting smoke. Laughter echoed through the forest as 7-year-old Jamie tossed a snowball toward his sister, Ella, who was busy arranging cooking supplies. Their mother, Lena, was pouring hot cocoa, while their father, Daniel, knelt by the fire, carefully adding more wood to prepare for making toasted sandwiches. In the heart of this warm family scene was Max, a retired German shepherd who had served for years in a K-9 search and rescue unit. His thick coat of brown and black fur quivered slightly in the breeze. With ears perked and eyes alert, yet gentle, Max lay in a spot where he could see all members of the family, like a silent guardian of the woods. Whenever Jamie wandered too far, Max would quietly trail behind, keeping just enough distance. He didn't bark, didn't rush, but every movement was deliberate. Max wasn't as fast as he used to be, but the instinct to protect remained sharp, unshaken since his earliest days of training. Max had once been part of dozens of missions, searching for people lost in snowstorms, sniffing out victims buried beneath tons of icy snow. With his remarkable nose and fearless heart, he had saved more lives than anyone could count. But now Max had a simpler duty: to love and protect the family who had taken him in after his retirement. As the sun sank behind the treetops, the light shifted from gold to orange, then to pale violet. Everything was still, like a perfect winter painting, a place where time slowed and the world's rush seemed far away. But within this seemingly unchanging peace, Max suddenly stopped. His ear twitched. A faint sound, one only a creature seasoned by winters could detect. A sound that didn't belong. A wind swept through, different from the gentle breeze earlier. The scent in the air shifted too. Damp, dense, heavy with the smell of melting ice. Max stood up, eyes fixed on the northwest, where dark clouds were quietly gathering, slow but certain. No one in the family noticed. Jamie was still building a small snowman. Ella had just placed a pine twig on top of the tent like a miniature Christmas tree. Daniel adjusted the fire, and Lena smiled as she watched her children, caught in a picture-perfect moment. Only Max, whose instincts never slept, knew that this tranquility was merely the pause before the storm. He turned and slowly walked toward Daniel, gently nudging his hand with his nose. Daniel chuckled and patted Max's head. "What's the matter, old boy? Want a bite of the sandwich?" But Max kept staring toward the horizon. A distant rumble of thunder rolled, so faint that only he could hear it. But it was enough. Something was coming, and Max knew. This wouldn't be just another snowfall. The storm was silently approaching. And this time, Max's mission wasn't to save strangers in some distant operation. It was to protect his family. Part 2. The Accident in the Snowy Forest. The sky had turned a leaden gray as the first snowflakes began to fall, soft, fine, and cold, like tiny threads of silk. The wind picked up in sharp gusts, swaying the pine trees as if whispering some ominous warning. While their parents were cleaning up after dinner, Ella, 11 years old, bright and full of curiosity, had coaxed her younger cousin Lily to explore a narrow trail winding deeper into the forest. What began as a quick stroll to look around and come back soon quickly turned into more. Not wanting to bother the adults, the two girls left their gloves hanging on the tent pole, a silent signal that we're just nearby. Max had noticed the two small figures dart past the edge of the woods. He lifted his head, instinctively ready to follow, but hesitated. The sound of Daniel calling behind him held him back. Moments later, the first howling gust of storm wind swept through the trees. "Lily, wait for me!" Ella llamó después de su prima, quien estaba corriendo adelante sin mirar atrás. Their laughter rang out at first but gradually faded into the growing roar of the wind through the branches. Neither of them realized they'd gone farther than intended. The trail beneath their feet had vanished under a fresh layer of snow, erasing any chance of retracing their steps. Suddenly, Ella froze. The ground beneath her shifted like quicksand. A sharp crack echoed. The thin ice over a hidden crevice gave way. "Lily!" Ella screamed as her body slipped into a steep, snow-filled ravine. Branches whipped across her face. Snow lashed her eyes, blinding her. She tumbled, shielding her head with her arms, until she slammed against the base of a tree with a sickening thud. "Ella!" Lily's panicked voice echoed back, close but impossibly far. Driven by instinct, Lily charged toward the sound, but the thick snow distorted everything, and she quickly lost her bearings. Her foot caught on a tree root, and she stumbled hard, sliding in the opposite direction. She screamed, but snow filled her mouth, muffling her cries. She tried to rise, but her right ankle seared with pain. "Ella! Ella!" Her voice cracked, swallowed by the wind that now roared like a wild beast. Back at camp, the snow was no longer gentle. It fell in heavy sheets, whipped by winds like snapping whips. Lena instinctively looked around and called out, "Ella? Jamie? Where's Lily?" Daniel glanced up, his eyes scanning the campsite in a flash. Jamie was asleep inside the tent, but the two girls were nowhere in sight. The gloves still hung on the pole. They locked eyes. Panic sparked in both their expressions. Lena turned to Max. "Go, Max! Find Ella! Find Lily!" Her voice trembled, but it was clear. Max leapt up, barked once, sharp and sure, then bolted into the forest like an arrow. Every instinct in his body flared to life, nose close to the snow, ears tuned to the faintest buried sound. The scent of Ella, mingled with pine and snow, guided him down a barely-there path. Down in the ravine, Ella was shivering violently. Her jacket had torn at the sleeve, blood staining the white fabric. She tried not to cry, but the howling wind numbed her lips, her thoughts spinning. "Lily, where are you?" she whispered, her breath curling in the icy air like fragile smoke. Not far away, Lily was struggling to stand on one leg, her eyes blurred with tears and frost. But only one thought burned in her mind. She had to find Ella. The two girls, separated by trees, terrain, and storm, called each other's names, but the wind devoured every sound. No one heard, and the sky was growing darker by the minute. Suddenly, Max stopped. He barked twice, loud, alert, and turned his head, torn between two directions. To the left, a faint scent of blood. To the right, something familiar, milk and strawberry candy. Max growled softly, a deep sound rumbling in his throat. He hesitated. Instinct told him both girls needed help. But where should he start? The storm raged louder. Max blinked rapidly, trying to clear the snow from his eyes. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Because to Max, family wasn't an idea. It was the one remaining command etched into the heart of a retired soldier. And on the coldest night of that winter, Max charged forward, in one direction. He could only choose one first. The other girl would have to wait. In the bitter wind, there were gasps for air. There were tears. And there was a loyal dog racing against time, defying a whiteout storm with a single desperate hope that he'd be fast enough. Part 3. Instinct Awakens. The wind howled like a cry from some far-off realm, carrying stinging flurries that lashed at the face. The forest moaned, trees creaking under the weight of the storm, as if bracing themselves against an unseen force. Darkness fell so fast no one had time to prepare. A dull gray swallowed the woods whole, slashed only by streaks of wind like the claws of a massive, invisible beast. And in that darkness, Max was running. No longer was it the leisurely pace of an old dog, but a full sprint, a powerful surge through the snow, each step pounding into the frozen ground like a memory from his harshest missions. His ears were nearly frozen, his nose swollen from icy blows, but he didn't stop. That scent, it was still there, faint, fading, strawberry candy mixed with mud and fear. Lily's scent. Max pushed through a snow-laden thicket, tearing the skin on his front leg. He didn't yelp. He didn't stop to lick the wound. His aging eyes still held the fire of determination. The instincts of a soldier had fully awakened. In the night, amid a storm that seemed to want to bury everything. After a long slide down a crumbling slope, Max halted. His ears perked, straining to catch the slightest sound beneath the roar of wind. A cry? No, a whimper. Max turned, sniffing fiercely. Seconds later, he pushed into a dense tangle of bushes, their dead branches hooking into his fur, his ears, his neck. Still, Max pressed in deeper. And then he saw Lily. She lay curled beneath the trunk of a decaying tree, her back coated in snow. One arm was trapped under a root, and her hair had frozen into stiff little clumps. Her face was pale, lips tinted blue. Her breaths came shallow, like thin vapor barely visible in the winter air. Max let out a low sound from his throat and stepped closer. He nudged her shoulder gently with his nose. No response. Woof! Max barked sharply. Then again, twice more. His voice rang out through the snowy night like a cry for help. He pawed lightly at her shoulder, licking her face, his body trembling from the cold with every movement. A faint moan escaped. Lily's eyelids twitched. Max leaned in, lying close against her, pressing his body to hers to share what little warmth he had left. He clawed at the snow around them, shaping it with his muzzle into a small barricade to block the wind. Between each movement, he would lift his head and bark short, clear calls, like his own version of an SOS back toward the camp. The wind intensified. A nearby branch cracked and fell, shattering with a sharp snap. Snow poured in from all sides, but Max didn't move. He lay there, still and firm, shielding Lily with the body of a dog trained through hundreds of hours in the harshest conditions. Outside, the forest had become a white labyrinth. No one could see, no one could hear, but Max, with a will that couldn't be broken, was still fighting through ice and time. He growled again, not a warning, not anger. It was a sound of worry. Lily's breathing had grown ragged. Her cheek felt like solid ice. Max knew, if she lost consciousness, hypothermia would come fast, and after that, that couldn't happen. Max lowered his head and licked her eyelids. This time she blinked slowly. Her lips moved, weakly, a whisper barely formed. Ella? Max growled softly, then let out a quiet bark. Lily slowly turned her head, her blurred eyes meeting Max's warm, brown gaze. For a moment, something like trust, or simply the feeling of not being alone, flickered in her expression. Max, she breathed, the corners of her lips twitching into a trembling smile. Max gently nuzzled her cheek. Then he barked again, once, twice, 3 times. Each bark, a promise that he would not leave her, not tonight, not when a fragile life was resting beside him, clinging to either a miracle or courage. And Max knew he was that miracle. The storm hadn't passed. The wind howled louder, like it wanted to rip the forest apart. The snow thickened by the hour. The cold slithered into every bone. But in a small hollow beneath a fallen tree, in the frozen silence of the white woods, a 4-legged figure curled tightly around a fading child's body. A soul keeping watch, a heart that knew no fear, and a race against time that was still far from over. Part 4, Finding the Other One. The wind still screamed, a chilling symphony with no end. Snow fell so thick it turned the entire forest into a white curtain, erasing every trace of a path. Tree trunks creaked and groaned under the weight, snapping with sharp cracks as heavy clumps of snow crashed onto the frozen ground. Beneath a rotting pine tree, Max lay still, his weary body wrapped protectively around little Lily, who was drifting into unconsciousness from the cold. His breathing was rapid, chest heaving. One of his hind legs was bleeding from a deep gash sustained during the icy descent. But when Lily stirred again, just a little, Max's eyes lit up. She was still alive. Max looked around. The storm hadn't passed, but he knew the mission wasn't over. Ella was still out there, alone, somewhere in the endless white. Max nudged Lily gently toward the base of the tree, building a snow wall on 3 sides to block the wind. He scraped the ground to reveal a patch of dry earth, then laid a torn piece of his own coat beside her. His scent, a signal. He licked Lily's cheek one last time and let out a soft, low bark. Then he turned away and walked. This time, every step was a struggle. His muscles stiffened with cold. His vision blurred as ice clung to his lashes. But he kept sniffing, desperately following the fading traces of a scent. Ella's. Sometimes it vanished completely, then returned like a faint memory. Max's instincts guided him uphill. Branches whipped his face, and the wind tore through his fur. But he no longer felt pain. He knew pain. He was trained for it. What he feared more was losing the trail. A violent gust slammed into him, toppling his large frame. He tumbled, rolling over in the snow. A groan escaped, the first he'd made all night. His eyes closed for a moment. Then, a sound, a cry, a small broken sob, stretched thin by the wind like a tear across the soul. Max rose, not from instinct, from hope. He dragged his body toward the sound, limping now, but with every step more determined. And then in a forest hollow, where the crosswind cleared the snow just enough to see, Max spotted a small figure curled between two ice-covered rocks. Ella. She hugged her knees, her whole body shaking violently, her face streaked with tears, her hair matted with snow, lips dark with cold. Her wide, empty eyes stared at the ground. She had no strength left to scream, only small, choking sobs. Max didn't bark. He crawled up beside her and gently nudged her hand with his muzzle. Ella flinched. She looked up, and in that instant, her frost-dulled eyes lit up. "Max!" Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Max whined softly, part confirmation, part comfort. Ella lunged forward, wrapping her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his thick fur, her tears soaking into the already damp coat. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said between gasps, her voice trembling. "I was so scared. Scared you wouldn't find me." Max didn't understand every word, but he felt her pounding heartbeat, the desperate grip of her small arms. He nudged her shoulder, then turned and curled around her to block the wind. No howling blizzard could drown out the trust in Ella's eyes at that moment. In the fiercest storm, where all feeling had gone numb, Max, a retired dog, a soldier long thought to have finished fighting, had found the girl. Not because of command, not for reward, but for love. The wind shrieked through the trees like the cries of forgotten souls lost in the snow. The cold still clung to everything, and night fell deeper by the minute. But in the frozen forest, two fragile beings huddled together. A dog breathing heavily, his back covered in dried blood and ice. A girl still crying, but now with tears of hope. Max lifted his head. He let out a soft bark, faint but clear. Somewhere deep in his instincts he knew there was still one more thing left to do. Part 5. The Price of Loyalty. Max lay close beside Ella, his breath rising in pale clouds that vanished into the freezing air. The girl had stopped crying. Her small body was curled in on itself, arms limp at her sides. Her lips had turned a deep shade of purple. The eyes that had only moments ago lit up with hope were now shut tight, like doors slammed shut against the raging white storm. "No!" Max couldn't speak, but in his eyes every heartbeat seemed to scream that word. He whimpered softly and nudged her shoulder, trying to stir her. No response. He licked her cheek again and again until the fur around his mouth began to freeze into sharp, icy tufts. Still, she didn't move. The wind howled on, trees cracking nearby as snow burst into small cyclones, flinging debris across the woods. Max knew, if they stayed here, Ella wouldn't make it. And he wouldn't let that happen. He clamped his jaws gently around her collar, trying to lift her from the snow. Once he had pulled grown men 3 times his size from the rubble of disaster zones. But today, he was no longer the powerful K-9 rescue dog of his youth. His body was bleeding, trembling from exhaustion, and every pull made his joints scream with the threat of breaking. But Max still pulled, inches at a time. The snow clung like stone, weighing Ella down as if she were twice her size. Max backed up, dragged again, and fell when his hind legs slipped on the ice. He growled, got up, and kept pulling. The wind blasted his face, gusts so strong they pushed him backward, trying to undo his every effort. Snow stung his eyes, his ears, his bruised, purpled wound. At times, Max stopped, gasping, on the edge of collapse. But each time his gaze fell on Ella's unconscious face, he kept going, not fast, not strong, but relentless, like a soul that refused to give up. Beneath the most brutal storm of that winter, Max inched forward, dragging Ella toward the only shelter he knew, where Lily still lay. The path back was gone, buried beneath a new layer of snow. But Max didn't need to see. He remembered. His instincts led him, his memory of every twisted tree, every crooked slope, every stone, all engraved in his mind like a living map. Each time he fell, he rose again. Each time his legs gave out, he used his entire body to pull her just a little farther. And through it all, only one thought echoed through his being. As long as I breathe, she must live. The storm was now at its peak. Snow fell in blinding waves, as if to bury the world itself. The wind no longer blew. It roared. Trees were uprooted. The sky had no shape. The world had become nothing but white in the screaming of the cold. And in it, an old tattered dog dragged an unconscious child, driven by a will stronger than the blizzard itself. When a familiar scent finally reached his nose, Lily's, Max nearly collapsed. His whole body shuddered uncontrollably. His breath was shallow and broken. His eyes blurred. His ears rang. But still he moved. He pulled Ella beside the tree where Lily lay, and only when both girls were finally together, side by side, did Max allow himself to collapse. His heart pounded like it would burst. Blood seeped from his legs, staining the snow with fading smears of red. The wind sliced into his wound, sharp as a blade. But Max didn't sleep. He rested his head on Ella, curling his battered body over both girls. Once more he became a wall, against the ice, against the wind, against fear and death. Max's eyes slowly began to close. His breathing slowed. Somewhere far off, a sound, a voice, or just an echo in the wind? He couldn't tell. All he knew was the mission wasn't over yet. Part 6. The rescue team in despair. The wind lashed their faces like whips. Every step was a battle against a furious, unforgiving nature. The blizzard was no longer just weather. It was a living force, wild, white, relentless. Daniel and Lena plunged through the woods with flashlights, their voices hoarse from shouting, lips numb from cold. Their eyes scanned frantically for any sign, but all they saw was ice and darkness. They split up, each heading in a different direction, clinging to the fragile hope that a call would be answered. "Ella! Lily!" Daniel shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind, vanishing into the void like a desperate whisper. Lena tried to move faster, but her legs kept sinking into the thick snow. Her flashlight flickered in the cold, and her hands shook so violently she could barely hold it steady. She called for her daughters with the raw voice of a mother whose heart was bleeding, all sense of composure gone. "Please, please, give me back my babies," she whispered, her tears blending with the snow. They had been searching for hours, no footprints, no cries, no hope. Only one thing kept them from falling to their knees. Max hadn't come back. Max, the old dog they'd rescued from the shelter, the one with eyes that saw straight into the human soul, the one who had plunged into the storm for their children. And Max had never failed. Daniel stopped, eyes bloodshot from cold and grief. He leaned on his knees and screamed again, this time like a plea to the heavens. "Max, if you can hear me, bring us to them. Please." No one heard the first bark. The wind was too loud. But the second bark, closer, cut through sharp and clear. Lena spun around. "Daniel!" she cried, eyes wide with sudden hope. "Did you hear that? It's Max! Max!" They ran toward the sound, eyes straining through the blinding snow, until a dark shape emerged from the white fog, stumbling, low to the ground but still moving. Maximum. His fur was soaked, matted with ice and dried blood. One leg dragged behind him. Each step looked like a war. His brown eyes were red from the wind, but inside them still burned life and purpose. "Max!" Daniel shouted, running toward him, but Max didn't stop. He barked once, then turned, looking back at them. That look, it needed no words, only one message. "Follow me," and Max limped away. Lena burst into tears. "He's alive. He's showing us the way." They chased after Max's fading silhouette. The old dog led them through a narrow, winding trail, then down a slope. Sometimes he collapsed and Daniel had to lift him up. Sometimes he paused, growling from pain. But he kept going, as if stopping would mean the end of everything. They passed broken branches, slid through a narrow ravine, followed faint trails of blood frozen into the snow. And then Max stopped. He turned his head and barked 3 times, each one shaky but full of resolve. Before them stood a rotting tree, shielded by rocks and snow shaped into a small shelter. Inside, 2 tiny bodies curled up together. "Ella! Lily!" Lena nearly collapsed, wrapping her trembling arms around her daughters. Daniel dropped to his knees, checking their breaths, calling their names, tears shining in his eyes. Ella blinked. A faint whimper escaped her lips. Lily stirred. They were both alive. Fragile, freezing, but alive. Max stood still, panting heavily. His vision blurred. Whether from ice or tears, no one could tell. He took 1 step back, then another. His body swayed slightly. Then he collapsed, as the wind howled on. Part 7. A successful rescue. The forest was still drowned in a thick blanket of white, but in a small hollow beneath the rotting tree, where the wind had softened as if bowing to sheer courage, a miracle had happened. Daniel, shivering, opened his coat and wrapped it tightly around Ella. Then Lily, holding them against his chest like letting go would cause them to vanish into the cold. Lena stripped off her scarf, her sweater, even the lining of her coat, wrapping it all around her daughter's tiny bodies. She pressed her face to Lily's forehead, whispering over and over like a prayer breaking from her throat. "You're here. Mommy's here. You're safe now." Ella let out a soft moan, barely audible, but it pierced the dense blizzard of despair like an arrow. Daniel nodded, his eyes blurred with tears. "They're breathing. Both of them. They're still breathing." No one noticed that Max was still there, standing, in the snow, silent. His breath came in broken clouds. He looked at Ella, then Lily, as if he needed to see, just one last time, that his mission was truly complete. Then Max began to walk toward them, slowly, unsteadily. His hind leg dragged behind, leaving a thin trail of blood that melted in the snow from the heat his body was quickly losing. Daniel looked up just in time to see Max collapse right in front of him, those brown eyes gazing upward, calm, unafraid. "Max!" Daniel cried, dropping down to cradle the dog's head. "No, not now." Lena burst into sobs. She knelt beside them, pressing her face into Max's frozen fur. Her shaking fingers searched for a pulse. It was there, faint, but there. Then from somewhere deep in the trees came the sound of a rescue horn, piercing the storm like a bell from another world. A world still alive, still holding on to hope. Headlights cut through the snow, casting a sharp beam toward them. 2 rescue workers rushed forward, carrying stretchers and thermal blankets. "We saw the signal fire you lit earlier," one of them shouted through the fabric wrapped around his face. "Where are the kids?" Daniel pointed to the hollow under the tree, his voice raw. "Over there." "Both of them. They're alive." And the dog. Max was placed gently on a smaller stretcher, covered with an emergency blanket. One of the rescuers looked surprised. "This dog, he led you to them, didn't he?" Daniel nodded, choking up. "He saved my daughters. Found them both, then came back to guide us. If it weren't for him," he couldn't finish. His throat closed. His hand gripped Max's paw, now limp, unresponsive. But Max's eyes were still open, still watching them. In the ambulance, everything moved like a whirlwind. The girls were given warm IV fluids, wrapped in thick blankets, and had hot packs placed on their hands and feet. A doctor checked each reflex, every breath, every heartbeat. Weak, but stable. Max lay at the back of the vehicle, beside Daniel. An oxygen mask designed for animals was gently fitted over his muzzle. A veterinary nurse had been called in urgently from the nearest town, monitoring Max's pulse and body temperature constantly. Daniel leaned down, whispering into Max's ear, "You did good, Max. My daughters are alive. Because of you." Max couldn't bark. Only a slow heartbeat remained, and a soft, steady gaze. But in that moment, everyone knew. Max understood. He knew he had done the last, most important thing he could for the family he loved. Part 8, After the Rescue, the True Reward. The steady beep-beep of machines filled the quiet of the intensive care room. The air was no longer icy, but it carried a different kind of cold, the kind that came with waiting. White light from the ceiling bathed the large form of Max, now lying still on a soft cushion, covered with a thermal blanket and connected to IV tubes. One of his hind legs was fully bandaged, showing signs of severe frostbite. His once glossy coat had been shaved in patches, revealing bruises, cuts, and long, winding stitches. Each breath made his chest rise and fall slowly, but steadily, with determination. The on-duty vet sat silently beside him, jotting down his vitals. Heartbeat, reflexes, signs of recovery. But her eyes were focused on one thing only, Max's eyes. Still open, even if just slightly. Still locked on the door across the room. The one where Ella and Lily lay in twin white beds, surrounded by doctors and their parents. After hours of rewarming, IV fluids, and oxygen, the girls were now fully awake. A blush of pink had returned to their cheeks. Their breathing had steadied, and their eyes shone once more, like the first rays of sunlight after a long, bitter winter. "I want to see Max," Ella whispered, her voice still raspy. Lily, from the bed beside her, looked up anxiously. "Where is Max?" "He's okay, right?" Daniel looked over at Lena. Neither spoke at first, because the truth was, they didn't know for sure. "Max is still with the doctors," Lena said gently. "He's very tired, but he's awake. He's waiting for you." Ella didn't wait another second. She threw off her blanket and got out of bed. IV drip trailing behind her. A nurse rushed over, but Daniel held up a hand. He understood. Nothing mattered more than this. Lily shakily stood as well, clutching her cousin's hand. The two girls, frail and wrapped in hospital blankets, walked slowly toward the door, where the most patient gaze in the world was waiting. The door opened. A light breeze swept in from the hallway, carrying the soft padding of tiny footsteps. Max blinked. His ears twitched. His breathing quickened ever so slightly. Ella was the first to reach him, her eyes glistening, voice trembling with joy and emotion. "Max." Lily followed close behind, saying nothing, just looking at Max, then rushing into his neck for a hug, burying her face in his rough, miraculously warm fur. Ella se arrodilló a su lado, colocando suavemente su mano en su cabeza, acariciando las áreas vendadas. She didn't cry, but her clear eyes, like freshly fallen snow, held everything: gratitude, love, and the fading shadow of fear. "Thank you, Max. Thank you for not leaving us." Max didn't bark, but he lifted his head just enough to nuzzle her hand. The room fell silent for a moment. It felt like a promise had been fulfilled. No one in that room saw Max as just an animal. They saw a hero, a friend, a member of the family, and Max understood that too. The next day, the entire hospital seemed to come alive with the story spreading through town. Reporters, local news crews, all came asking for interviews. Townspeople brought flowers, thank you cards, treats for the nurses, and more dog food and gifts for Max than he could ever eat. But Max didn't care about cameras, lights, or whispers. He stayed on his private bed in the treatment room, eyes always drifting toward the window, where sunlight streamed in, and where he waited for the sound of small feet to return. Because for Max, the true reward wasn't glory. It was hearing Ella laugh again. It was Lily wrapping her arms around his neck each morning, whispering, "You're still here with me, right?" It was Daniel's hand gently resting on his shoulder, saying, like to an old soldier, "Thank you for saving my whole world." And it was the peace Max felt every night as his eyes closed, knowing the ones he loved were safe. Part 9, a story that lives on and a message that remains. A week after the snowstorm, the small town surrounding the hospital found itself unusually bustling. The people, long familiar with white winters and biting cold, were now moved by a name echoing everywhere: Max. The image of the brave old dog appeared on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, beneath the headline, "The Dog Who Saved Lives, Max and the Great Blizzard Rescue of the Year." From local TV broadcasts to social media feeds, Max's story spread rapidly, not just because it was a miraculous survival tale, but because what touched people most was this. Max wasn't a special dog. He wasn't young or strong. He had no titles or medals to his name. He was a retired K-9, old, injured, once abandoned. And yet he saved an entire family. The school where Ella and Lily studied organized a special tribute. The auditorium was filled with white and blue balloons, and children stood one by one, reading essays titled "A Hero I Admire." A shy little girl stepped onto the stage, raising a drawing of Max above her head. "I don't want to be a police officer or an astronaut anymore. I want to be someone like Max, someone who knows how to love and protect others." The hall erupted in applause. Max, still a bit weak, was carried onto the stage by Daniel to a wave of cheers. His ears drooped, but those warm brown eyes stayed bright, calm, and quiet, just as they had been when he walked through the blizzard that night. Outside the Harrison home, gifts began piling up. From dog bones and handmade cards to letters sent from across the country written with care. "Max, you're a true hero. Thank you for reminding us. Love doesn't need words. Your story made me hug my mom tighter today." Each time Lena read one aloud, she silently wiped away tears. Not out of sorrow, but because she realized the world needed stories like this. Former firefighters, police officers, and paramedics who once worked with Max returned. They held a small ceremony and awarded Max an honorary medal. Not because of protocol, but out of deep respect. Daniel placed the medal around Max's neck, then bowed low and whispered, "You weren't just a dog. You're proof of something many have forgotten: loyalty, love, and courage, right down to the very last breath." And Max, he didn't care about flashbulbs or headlines. Each morning he still woke at the same time, hobbling gently around the yard, sometimes letting out a soft bark to say everything's okay. He still lay watchfully by the door when Lily took her afternoon naps. And each night, Ella read stories aloud to him, resting her head against his belly, giggling. To Max, that was the real reward. No one can teach a dog loyalty. You can't command a creature to give everything it has just to save someone else. That comes from only one place: love, the strongest instinct of all. Max's story won't be printed in textbooks or win any prestigious awards, but it has found its way into the hearts of thousands, as a quiet reminder that, in a world growing faster and more uncertain, there are still hearts willing to give everything without needing recognition. Resilience doesn't always come from the strongest, but from those who refuse to give up. And loyalty, rare as it is, was proven true by one old dog, who didn't need to speak a single word to show a love strong enough to defeat a storm.